Peace and Black Power, family. This is Shakem Amenhotep Akhet. Right back at you once again. I want to really give you a nice visual of what I want you to learn today. First and foremost, I want to have a little brief overview of what I came across that's actually called the cone of learning. The cone of learning is a very interesting concept, and it basically just reinforces some of what we already know about the learning process. We've always been told that there are different types of learner. Anytime that you've gone to school, you've heard a lot of educators basically state that students learn in different ways. Some students are visual learners. They have to actually see things being done in order for them to grasp the concept more quickly. Some people are I would say, hands-on learners, where they actually begin to engage in that activity in order for them to be able to remember what they've done, and it helps them to retain the information more quickly than just visually seeing it. And some of us more are passive learners. The passive learners are basically people who like to read things and basically hear words and things of that nature. So we have different types of learning. We have passive learning, which is verbal receiving and visual receiving. And then you have active learning, which is actually receiving and participating in that activity and actually doing that activity. Now, research has actually shown that the active type of learning is the best type of learning for us to engage in. It allows us to participate in the activity, and it involves us doing things that we actually learned and read about. And when we sit down and we actually start doing these things, it allows us to be able to retain the information better than just basically the reading portion or looking at pictures, such as reading a book. And this is essentially why the school system is failing us. The school system particularly only focuses on that reading or the verbal receiving or the passive or the visual or looking at books and looking at pictures and reading and hearing words. And since the school system only focuses on this particular type of learning, it misses out on the key element of learning, which is participating and receiving and doing that activity. This is why a lot of our children are failing now, because the school doesn't allow us or our children to engage in these particular trades that we normally had when we were younger, and schools allow people to participate, our children to participate in trades. So now all they have, K through 12, is actually reading, hearing words, and looking at pictures or listening to lectures, versus them actually going out while they're in the school and participating in doing these activities. Therefore, now the school system is failing us because we are not exercising all of the information. We're not doing the information that we are reading and hearing and looking at until after school is out, you go into the real world. And that is why with a lot of jobs, they would rather have an applicant who has actually been in a field for 10 or 12 years versus a student who's graduated with his master's or bachelor's who's been in school the exact same amount of time. So a person without a degree actually gets a job or gets employment faster than a person who has a degree, by virtue of the fact that this person was actually participating, receiving, and doing the activity, versus somebody who's only sat down in a classroom and visualized, read, and heard the words. Now, our discussion is going to take a brief turn, and I wanted to actually get that out of the way so that we can move on to the next phase. And that was just something very interesting about learning. Therefore, you can research it a little more at the conclusion of this lecture, and you can maybe look into ways that, we can design for our children to learn in the participating manner. Now, this European that I put on the board, he was actually known as the father of classical conditioning. there was a certain time when Europeans wanted to actually study the behavior of things. And a lot of them, with the racist ideologies that they possess, they wanted to find certain things that they can do to demean our people. And they wanted to actually classify us as subhuman. And they started putting out certain experiments to try to actually negate who we are as individuals. And they wanted to dumb us down, and they put different tags on us through psychology and through sociology. And this European right here, his name is Ivan Pavlov, the father of classical conditioning. Now, classical conditioning goes as follows, and I'm going to show you how through the study of classical conditioning, we've come to actually see how the media in white supremacy is using classical conditioning to actually make us respond to things in a particular manner, and they can actually predict with a certainty the behavior of a people through classical conditioning. Now, it goes as such. So we have before conditioning, there's something called an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. Therefore, that is just basic nature taking its course. So we have the food, which is unconditioned, and we have the dog looking at the food, which gets a response. The response is salivation. This is a natural process. This is actually before conditioning. Now we have the dog looking at the tuning fork. The tuning fork, when it rings, it actually doesn't do anything to the dog, because the dog naturally does not respond to a tuning fork. So therefore, it's no response. There's no conditioning response. Now what happens during the conditioning, where the behavior is actually being shaped, we have the tuning fork actually placed with the food, and when the dog sees the food, the tuning fork is hit, and now the dog begins to salivate. So now what happens is this response has to be, this process has to be done over again, over and over and over and over again, in order for the dog to actually begin to associate the tuning fork with the food. So the process is done over and over and over again. And once that happens, the dog essentially has become conditioned. Now, when you take away that food and you just have the tuning fork and you hit the tuning fork, he found out that the dog begins to salivate because he associates the tuning fork with food. So therefore, that which was once not, I would say, natural, becomes natural. Now, this is how white supremacy uses this against us. Let's take out the dog and replace it with a human. And let's take out the food and place it with a police officer. Now, this is how white supremacy works. If a brother sees a police officer in the street, naturally, all you do is see the boys in blue. It's nothing that causes consternation or fear. It is nothing that arouses your stimulus or arouses your mind, because all you are looking at is a man in a blue uniform. So what ends up happening is the man in the blue uniform, he begins to use force against brothers in the street. So now immediately the brothers who once saw the police officer as being harmless just basically by looking at him in a uniform, now he begins to associate that badge of that uniform with brutality, with violence. So now what happens is he has been conditioned through hatred, through violence, that now when he sees that uniform, it automatically instills fear in him. And that is what the white man has done. He has actually begun to condition our people to see him in positions of authority. he has now begun to concoct situations to where we now look at him as being superior and us being inferior. Even with situations with marketing, look at how every time the European wants to sell a car, what does he do? He gets a woman to rub up against the car and put her arm against the car. What he's doing is actually conditioning you. He's conditioning you to see that woman every time you have that beautiful car, and then it looks as if that woman is bringing you, that car is bringing you happiness just because the woman is now associated with that car. The same thing when they want to sell a bed. What do? Put a beautiful woman, lay her on the bed. That is how the media actually conditions our people to see things in a manner that is actually unnatural. And through these hidden associations and through these signs and symbols, we are now conditioned as a people to see things as they really aren't. This is the process of creating an illusion. So therefore, family, in the event we want to take things back and we want to structure a society that is absent of white supremacy or European domination, we have to begin to reverse this process. So now things that we once saw as being detrimental to us, that are really good for us, we need to reverse that process. And we really need to understand how we can take the conditioning process and turn it back around to help benefit us as a people. Thank you once again, family. Peace and Black Power. Shakem Amenhotep Akhet. Charleston, South Carolina, RBG. Peace and love, family. Hotep.